There's a lot of anime that flies under the radar in an anime season. Sometimes it's because it's terrible and doesn't deserve to be discovered. Sometimes it's because it doesn't have the marketing budget of a more popular anime. And sometimes it's because it's a niche adaptation that doesn't appeal to a large audience. In this case, it's the last two. Girl from the Other Side is one of the most unique and thoughtful anime I've watched in a long time. And it seems to be almost completely unnoticed this season. So I wanted to talk about it. Girl from the Other Side is a story about found family in an unfamiliar environment. It comes with a unique art style and lovable characters, but that's not the only thing that makes it worth watching. The reason I think just about anyone could watch this show is the length. This show is literally 3 episodes long. That's it. The entire story in 3 episodes. And it's a decent story at that. Obviously, there's only so much you can do in 3 episodes in terms of character development and story, but I honestly think this length is part of what sets it apart. On top of the low time commitment, the length also makes the pacing feel different. It's somehow both slow and fast. Like sometimes when I watch it feels like an entire episode will have passed in terms of length, but in reality it's only about half an episode. It's usually a sign of slow or drawn out pacing, but it's not in this case because the story is constantly progressing. It's somehow both dense in content and slow paced, which is a very weird combination, but I think it works well for the show and the story it tells. Unsurprisingly, it's hard to talk about the story without spoiling it because it's only 3 episodes long, but as I said earlier, it's a story about found family in a bizarre world. Some sort of calamity or disease is affecting humans and forcing them to abandon their villages. These villages are the main setting for the show. One of the aspects of the story that is really unique is the way that it deals with this calamity. Most shows would make this calamity like the main feature or an important background plot point. However, in Girl from the Other Side, it's nothing more than a simple plot point used to set the premise of the show. The plot follows the relationship between this bird person and this child as the bird tries to get the child back to humanity safely. The majority of the show is spent developing the relationship between these two and developing the dark secrets that lie within the woods surrounding the villages. There are major themes of loneliness and change, both welcome and unwelcome. These themes are enhanced by the heavy visual symbolism throughout the show, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. As much as I would love to continue singing praise to the story, I can't. While I personally enjoyed the plot, it can be hard to follow at times. This is mostly because this 3-episode story is attempting to adapt 11 volumes of manga, and as a result, a lot of the finer points are left out in an attempt to hit as many major plot points as possible. Don't get me wrong, I still think the story is enjoyable and you can understand what's going on like 80% of the time, but I do think this is one of the aspects where the show's length is definitely a hindrance. But enough about the story, let's talk about what everyone came here for: the characters and the art style. The art style in this anime is purely stunning and simple. It's one of the main reasons that I decided to watch the show in the first place, and I am not disappointed by it at any point during its run. The art is heavily inspired by traditional Western children's books, so the show looks like something you would find in a fairy tale. No, not that fairy tale, that fairy tale. As you can probably tell, the art is based on pencil drawings with watercolor-esque shading. These make up the majority of the show and are very beautiful on their own. They help set the tone of the show in multiple ways: the stillness of the water, the warmth coming from flames, the cluttered nature of the abandoned houses. They are all shown throughout the same art style, and it's so much more effective to developing the atmosphere than any exposition or traditional anime styles could be. On top of this, the lighting in these scenes is immaculate. It really feels like the candles are lit in real life with how the flickering and shadows are done in this show. However, where I think the art style really shines is the select scenes where they start to stray away from the center of their art style. The coloration and details in these scenes is simply breathtaking. Sometimes they lean more into the watercolor effects. Sometimes they completely change it to a more charcoaled approach. These scenes only happen a couple of times throughout the show, but that's what makes them all the more special. They're unique, and they allow for some very unique visual storytelling and visual symbolism. The visual symbolism in this show can fit everyone's needs. Sometimes it's heavy-handed. I mean, do you even need me to explain this? Just look at these two characters. There's a lot of this very obvious symbolism throughout the show, but a lot of it is less obvious and might take a couple of watches to grasp. It's honestly one of the only aspects that gives this show any rewatchability. If you decide to go for a rewatch, you'll notice so many more symbolic and visual metaphors throughout. Small detail that seemed insignificant take on new meaning once you can pay closer attention to them, and I'm sure I would notice even more details on my 3rd or 4th watch throughs. If you're the type of viewer that enjoys finding these hidden details on repeated watches, this is definitely a show you will enjoy. Let's move on to the next major drawback draw, which is the characters. Both of the main leads are interesting and strike this Goldilocks area of complexity. They're not too complex to understand in 3 episodes, but they're still interesting enough that they somehow feel alive. The show wastes no time in familiarizing us with these characters either, and it quickly develops the core of their personalities early into the first episode. Not that it has time to take in the first place anyway. We are first introduced to our female lead, the child. For a child character, she's not too bad. She's a good balance of cute and useful to the plot in a way that fits the show. Obviously, she's not as cute as like Anya, but she's not supposed to be. It wouldn't fit the tone of the story to have all the expressions and wakas that Anya has, but she is still cute in her own ways. My main gripe with this character is sometimes she doesn't feel like a child. Like sometimes she just talks clearly and more concisely than college students, and she's supposed to be like 10 years old. So it just kind of breaks immersion occasionally to hear someone so young speak so maturely. Not to the point that it ruins her character or anything, but it's definitely a noticeable characteristic for her. As for the Birdman, I really have no complaints. He serves as the main vehicle for this story, and I think he does a great job at it. We hear his internal dialogues the vast majority of the time, and we get to understand his character the most out of any character introduced. His voice actor is great, his character design is pretty cool. I really have nothing negative to say about him. However, there are a few aspects of the show that I do have negative things to say about. But before we do that, please subscribe. If you've made it this far into the video, you obviously enjoy the content, so you really have no reason not to subscribe. The vast majority of my viewers are not subscribed, and that's pretty bad for the YouTube algorithm. But the only way I can fix it is with your help. So please be sure to subscribe, and let's talk about a few of the negative aspects of this show. I think something I have to acknowledge about this show is that it might not be great for my specific audience. I've built a lot of this account on shonen anime, and as I'm sure you can tell, this is not a typical shonen. As a result, a lot of you might end up not enjoying this show, and it might have issues holding your attention as well. It's not action-packed, it's not that fast-paced, but I think it's still worth watching even if it's outside of your normal scope of shows. It still has plenty of mystery and suspense even if it lacks action. Another major drawback for me specifically is the lack of soundtrack. There is almost no soundtrack in this show, and when there is soundtrack, it's very minimal. If I had to guess, I would say this is probably an intentional decision to accentuate the feeling of emptiness present throughout this show, but it does feel overly empty at times. Even just a minimal soundtrack to reflect the minimal art style could have been more effective than the nothing we got, and I think even that small change could have helped some of the more sluggish moments. And the final part of the show that I think could have been better is its accuracy to the manga. I haven't actually read the manga, but as I said earlier, this show tries to fit 11 volumes in 3 episodes. And if you know anything about anime, you know that's not going to be an accurate adaptation. I still think the anime is a good standalone show, but considering it is already very high quality, I can only imagine the manga is much better, which does leave a bit of a sour taste in my mouth. Girl from the Other Side is a very unique and very short show. These 2 attributes alone make it worth watching, and I think the characters add to it as well. If you made it to the end of this video and you think you're intrigued, just give it a shot. It's only an hour of your life. It's not like I'm asking you to watch One Piece or anything. Please make sure you're subscribed, and if you are, maybe join the Discord or Patreon. Thanks again, and I'll see you next week.